Hello and welcome to this IsleVote21 online meeting for the Isle of Wight County Council seat of Brighstone, Calbourne and Shalfleet. A brief word for the benefit of the public. IsleVote21 has been formed with the sole purpose of enhancing democracy by providing an unbiased platform for candidates. We have no affiliations or funding and no candidates are aware of what questions will be asked today. Although a list of topics was distributed in advance to enable candidates to prepare. All 138 candidates in this year's election have been invited, either directly via group and party leaders, The following candidates have been invited to this meeting: Steve Hastings, the Conservative Party, Nick Stewart, Liberal Democrats, and Doug Alldred from the Green Party. In attendance, we have Nick Stewart and Doug Alldred. Candidates will be asked questions from our pool of questions, plus others that have been submitted by the public regarding island-wide issues and others regarding their specific locality. Candidates have been informed that there is a 2-minute limitation on answers. I will raise my hand as we approach that cutoff, and I request that the candidates finish up promptly afterwards. Before that commences, candidates have 2 minutes to give a personal statement. So, Doug, please go ahead, your 2 minutes.
Well, hello, I'm Doug Alldred and I'm your Green Party candidate for the Brighstone, Calbourne and Shalfleet ward. First of all, really, I'd like to tell you a bit about myself. So I'm a third generation islander. I've had family on the island since the 1950s. And I grew up in Brighstone, and as a child, I took full advantage of the countryside around the West Wight, building camps up in Grammars Forest and cycling around the back lanes. I may have even run through a cornfield on occasion. But in my later teens, I spent a lot of time scouring the local beaches for fossils and even took guided tours of school children and tourists on fossil hunts. Now, the local community is really, really important to me, and I've been a member of a lot of local sports clubs. I've swum the Solent on 3 occasions for local charities and plan to do so again. I've played league badminton on and off for many years. I've also worked at or ran several of the pubs in the area, as well as spending some time working at Carisbrooke High School. Now, I left the island in the early 2000s to get a degree in music technology before spending some time recording and touring with various bands, and that eventually led me to work in event management, during which time I worked all over the country at music festivals and other events. But eventually my affection for this area brought me back home. And more recently, I'm sure some of you might have seen me performing at a festival or a function or a pub through my current work as a self-employed musician. Or I might have even delivered you some wine, as I, like most musicians, have a part-time day job, and I'm fortunate that mine is in a wine shop. Now, I'm standing in this election because I believe the island needs more strong local voices, and I have a passion for this area, protecting what makes it so special. And I really want to see us achieve a resilient, sustainable recovery from the difficult year that we've all just endured. Now, as a local, I think I have a pretty strong understanding of the unique challenges and opportunities the Isle of Wight and this ward in particular face. And I believe that with Green Party voices like mine in County Hall, we can move forward with imagination and innovation and with security for our kids and our grandkids' futures.
Thank you very much, Doug.
Please,
Nick.
Good evening, everybody, or good morning, or good afternoon, whatever time you're viewing this. My name is Nick Stewart. Many of you will know me from my previous candidature here in the by-election in 2018 when I came second. But for my background, I'll put it before you again, as I've done several times. I arrived on the island 25 odd years ago. Our stays grew longer and I arrived here properly full-time about 20 years ago. I've been in various bits of West Wight, but landed in Brighstone and have come back to Brighstone. My background, certainly from the work point of view, is quite important. I spent 25 odd years in civil service, ending up as head of science and innovation for UK trade and investment. And that meant that I dealt with things like modern technologies in nanotechnology, but also I had full control over new energy sources in wave, wind and the like, and dealt with many of the companies that the island thinks of in that area, including Vestas. Since I left the civil service about 10 years ago, I've worked locally as a teacher in several high schools, and in the last 3 years I've transformed my passion of fencing, which I've always done, into a new career as a micro business, which has been very interesting because, of course, the COVID pandemic put the end to that last March. And for all intents and purposes, I've been unemployed ever since. I think one of the critical things, though, is what we offer for the island and for local possibilities. And I will concentrate on two things. One is planning grab, how housing is just not dealt with appropriately on the island, either for what we need or in terms of what is built. And the second thing, of course, is TT races, but I'm sure that will come up later on.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you, very interesting. So Doug, I'm going to fire the first question at you.
Okay.
How can residents become more confident and engaged with the council's decision-making processes? So how can residents become more confident and engaged with the council's decision-making processes?
I think that genuine transparency is the key, and making those processes less kind of arcane. As I understand it, the current cabinet is a kind of closed shop, and with the exception of some public meetings, doesn't minute its meetings at all, and certainly there doesn't appear to be any public record of those. So I don't see how, as members of the public, we can assess how the conclusions that the council are currently reaching have been got to. So with the exception of people making kind of freedom of information requests and that kind of thing, I think that despite their claims of being a transparent council, we don't really appear to have one. So my feeling would be that if you still have a kind of cabinet structure to the council, it needs to be fully minuted. Those minutes need to be freely publicly available on the website. They need to be publicised in social media, because actually, you're absolutely right. The only way that people are going to feel like they can trust the council to make decisions for the right reasons is by seeing how those decisions are reached. And that in itself will take away any suspicion of perhaps less than completely legitimate deals, by making it clear. To be honest, you know, when we were kids, we were all told to show our working in maths lessons, and at the moment the council is giving us the answer, but they're not showing us the working, and that's what we have to do.
First mute incident. Thank you very much, Doug. Over to you, Nick.
Okay, this is actually quite important because it's something which actually plays straight into our manifesto, which is open government. And one of the critical things is that the current system really is inward looking and doesn't give enough voices into the government of the governing the island. And therefore what you end up with is a small cabal of people in the cabinet making decisions. So the major thing that we would want to see is actually to return to a committee type system. But I'm no person who's going to say this is the only answer. And what Doug and other people have said about how you could change things are worthwhile looking at anyway. In separately, which I think is really important is actually what some independents do well and what the Liberal Democrats have always done well, which is direct contact with the public. That means regular newsletters to people, regular door knocking, regular public meetings where possible, and actually reaching out to all of the people in the area in whatever way is possible. And I've seen that done very successfully. And I've also seen going around, and I talk to a lot of people, that's my key thing, I talk to people and listen. The key thing is very much that you find out what do they know about their representatives. And when you talk to people in this ward, they have 2 representatives. And unfortunately, when you talk to people, and you say, do you know who your councillor is? And the standard reaction, in fact, I would say the vast majority of the reaction is they don't know. So the answer to the question is they have to know who their representative is.
Thank you. Okay, Nick, you're first for this question. What could the council do to inspire residents to take more pride in the island? What could the council do to inspire residents to take more pride in the island?
That's an interesting question, which means I hadn't thought of it before. I don't think there's there's any one thing that the council needs to do. What it needs to inspire people to have pride in the island, because many people have pride in their island, they have pride in their local community, and they're happy with their families. You know, when you talk to people about what is wrong, a lot of people will tell you that actually they think this is a good place to be. And I think both Doug and I would agree that actually we like living here all the time. In fact, I've struggled to get off the island sometimes, not because I can't, because I don't want to. So it's very much, what could they do to inspire us? Bottom line, be competent, because they're really not managing it very well. When they start showing up in private eye on an extremely regular basis, not just the council, but the individuals in the council, then you start to see why we're considered a bit of a laughing stock. When the education system is dealt with properly, and they don't utter things like 25%, as the current council have done, 25% of schools are going to be outstanding, and the current score on that is 0. So it's, from the council's point of view, let's start with the basics, do things competently, and stop standing in the way of everybody else, like the parish councils, like the town councils, like the community councils, and start working with them, which refers back to the previous question, which is, how do you get people more engaged? Make sure we're all at least singing from the same book, even if not the same hymn sheet.
Thank you very much, Nick. Over to you, Doug.
Could you just repeat the precise wording of the question for me?
Certainly, yes.
Thank you.
What could the council do to inspire residents to take more pride in the island? And we were aware when we were writing this question that actually the vast majority of people do love the island. You know, this isn't disparaging in any way whatsoever. Like yourselves, there's not that much I would change in many regards. But please.
Well, the answer to that question is to aid people getting involved in community projects and getting involved in regeneration. So there is a huge amount of local pride, which is kind of latent on the Isle of Wight, and I think we've both kind of referred to that. I'm not entirely sure that I agree with Nick that there are things that the island is seen as a laughing stock, but certainly there are some aspects perhaps of our administrations that might be. Very close to my own heart is things like Ventnor Fringe and the Ventnor Exchange, which are run by in part by my partner, and that's a really, really great example of regeneration at a community level. That was some young people when they started it 10 years ago who set up an event because they wanted to make something happen, and Ventnor is now seen so much more as a kind of cultural centre, and people take a real pride in that town. Now, that is something that can be echoed across the island, and it's getting people to take part, whether it's an arts and culture basis or whether it's just a community basis, in engendering pride by involvement. And people have to feel like, to use this kind of really political term, people have to feel like they're a stakeholder in their community in order to feel pride in it. And it is the council's job at a parish level and at a county level to help that happen. So be it through regenerating high streets, by encouraging local traders, by encouraging things like repair shops to go in and take up empty units. And once you get rid of those empty units, everything begins to look like it's more looked after, and that gives people more pride in where they are.
Thank you both very much. Okay, last question from us before we go on to the public questions. Tough one for you, Doug, I'm afraid. Are you ready?
I'll take it.
You'll take it. Yeah, who knows? You might have something great waiting in the wings.
Okay.
Can you suggest a new policy that the council could pursue on the island? Can you suggest a new policy that the council could pursue on the island?
I can suggest several in a kind of facetious and dismissive way that might improve their general behaviour, but I'm not really going to go down that route. I think there are so many new policies, but I think a really, really important one for making a difference for the day-to-day life of people would be to enact a minimum service level on the cross-Solent operators. So what we really need to be looking at, we've seen it through the pandemic where the numbers fall and they just cut the ferries. Now that doesn't help people who have relied on those links and have been trying to work through the pandemic. So what we really need to have is a legal obligation to protect that access across the Solent. And, you know, there's a huge amount of discussion and argument on what we do about our cross-Solent links. But the real important thing should be that there should be a subsidy for cross-Solent travel, similar to what they have for the Scottish Islands. And there should be an absolute minimum service requirement imposed on the ferry operators.
Okay, thank you very much, Doug. Pass the same question over to you, Nick. Would you like me to read it again?
Just a new policy on the island. I'm with Doug. There's quite a few. I'm going to have to pick Doug up on that. What he suggests is not within the remit of the council. It's something that I do know an awful lot about because I've been looking at this for many years as a civil servant and since. I've talked to the ferries directly. I've talked to both CEOs when I was the possible parliamentary candidate back in 2019, but I've spoken to other people as well. We agree that the ferries need regulation and they need support, subsidy. There's not real doubt about that. It's just, will the current government provide it in the way that they're going to, in which they've offered other things? And the answer is probably not. So what you have is a council that can lobby for those sort of things. What we actually need is new policy on the island, which we can enact. And I think the first sort of critical policy is what to do about the floating bridge, because there is absolutely no doubt that at the moment the policy seems to be keep the collapsing engineering nightmare and not do anything about it except pretend that it's still working. I mean, I actually used it for the first time in a long, long time because it happened to be working and I happened to be one side and needed to get to the other. I've been there lots of times, but it was actually working. Came out of service again relatively shortly afterwards. So that's one policy which I think we can immediately look at, which is replace the unfit floating bridge. There are others, and I will happen to mention a particular key one of mine, which is more woodlands on the island as a former botanist, and tree nut. I'm afraid I'm very much in favour of trees.
Could I just come back to Nick on that point as he picked me up on what I had to say?
Just very, very quickly, if you could, please, Doug.
Briefly, yeah, I appreciate that this is going a little bit off piste, so I apologise. Nick, I totally appreciate that there are some things that aren't directly within the remit of the council, but the one thing to ensure that the ferries don't get regulated and don't have to provide a minimum service is for the council to sit on their hands and not try and achieve it. If it may not be directly within our remit, but if the council isn't pushing for it, it's certainly not going to happen. And absolutely on the floating bridge, and my colleague Cameron Palin in Osborne has been integral in fighting for a replacement for that. So on that we can agree, Nick.
Okay, Nick, would you like your turn off piste, or should we move on to the next question?
I think I probably understand central and local government extremely well, so no, I don't have anything further to add to that.
Okay, thank you. So the next questions are from the public, or much of them are amalgams of many different questions and themes that the public have sent in to us. Okay, so the first one to you, Doug. What can be done to improve educational aspiration for residents of all ages? What can be done to improve educational aspiration for residents of all ages?
First and foremost, it's absolutely vital that we bring the schools back into a competent Isle of Wight Council control. At the moment, children's services, including schools, are being run by Hampshire because the administration, from my understanding, wasn't able to run them at a high enough level. We've got a real problem with the fact that over 10 plus years of Tory rule in this country, 93% of schools have had cuts to their funding. Now, it's really difficult to increase your educational aspiration at school, and it's really difficult to increase adult education aspiration when you have less and less money with which to educate people. So that's a first thing, and obviously that's not something, Nick, before you pick me up on the same point, that the council can necessarily resolve on its own, but it's an important point to make. Adult education needs far more access to it for people who want to retrain and who want to retrain in the kind of jobs that we're going to be looking at as we go onwards through the rest of the 21st century. The pandemic has taught us that working from home and IT skills are going to become far more important to people's livelihoods as we go on. And the way that we structure our children's education to improve aspiration is really important too. We need to bring back kind of peripatetic music and the arts, because that's really important for children's development. I came through school on the Isle of Wight, and I was taught music right the way through from primary school by peripatetic teachers, and that's what I've ended up doing as a job. And I think that's a hugely important part of educating people for the real world rather than just to pass an exam.
Thank you ever so much. Please, Nick.
Actually, I would have given a little bit of my time up to Doug on that very last point. He is absolutely right. The current school systems is based on academic achievement of producing papers. I've seen it from the inside. I taught science, so I don't have a direct connection to art and music, but I know how critical they are to the development of kids. And what I saw, and I was landed with quite a lot of children who were deemed not to be particularly successful, was that their capabilities were not being advanced. The current school system needs a big input of assistance from outside. That means from business, from voluntary organisations and the like. And of course, it is in our manifesto, because I helped write it. And it actually specifically says business and community links into schools to encourage vocational skills, community engagement and aspiration among our youth. So that's the very first thing. when you talk about adult education, what you're talking about is continuing education. In our current society, there is no way on earth that you can sit still and rely on the skills that you learnt at 15 or 16 and expect them to be there at 40 and 50. You have to keep developing. And those can be any type of skills. Vocational skills are critical. There's a shortage of electricians, there's a shortage of plumbers, there's a shortage of builders. And the builders, of course, of, say, green housing, which is a particular interest of mine, probably don't even exist on the island very much. So there is an enormous need to expand that type of education for slightly older people. So we need to develop a culture in our communities of islanders helping islanders, for people to realise that they can be engaged, and for schools to realise that people outside can also help.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick. The next question is going to be for you first, Nick. It's a little bit longer. Perhaps you might want me to read it twice. We'll see. The volunteer sector carries a great deal of weight on the island, especially during the COVID crisis, to the great relief of taxpayer-funded services. Can you suggest ways in which the council can support this sector?
Like Doug, I need that question again.
Okay, yes. We try to avoid longer questions.
That's fine. It's not a problem. It's a straightforward question, but I just want to answer the question.
Absolutely. Okay, here we go. The volunteer sector carries a great deal of weight on the island, especially during the COVID crisis, to the great relief of taxpayer-funded services. Here's the question. Can you suggest ways in which the council can support this sector?
The answer is clearly yes. The community groups which have been set up, the community hubs which have been set up, have been very, very successful in local areas, both in, for instance, Brighstone, but you can look to Freshwater, where the hub out around the Isle of Wight Sports and Community Centre have delivered direct help, they've delivered mental health help, they've delivered food help, and they've basically supported the community throughout this continuing crisis. What could the council do? Well, the council could start by talking to all of those voluntary groups and go on the basis that the only help needed is not money. They need support in terms of facilities, buildings and the like. They need links to other organisations. So in many ways, what you need to see coming out of a council is a fairly straightforward, how do you put it, conduit between some of the different organisations that exist. Doug quite rightly painted up the Ventnor Fringe group and what they've done, what they've created out of nothing and where they are. And those sort of initiatives and those sort of people are the people that the council need to talk to most of the time, so that when a crisis happens, they have that list of contacts, which is absolutely crucial, so they can go and say, can you lead on that? Can you lead on that? Can you lead on that? And it's not just about taxpayers' money, although that is very important, because there is a very limited pot, because we all know that the government has slashed well over half of the original council budget from some years ago. So yes, we have to do more with less, and you have to do more with the community.
Thank you, Nick. Same question over to you, Doug.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, the voluntary sector as the kind of amalgam of question askers are absolutely correct. The voluntary sector is now pretty much vital to us as a society. Everything from libraries, food banks, right the way across society are pretty much now completely run or very reliant upon the voluntary sector. Myself and my partner have been volunteering at the vaccine centre at Riverside, and the people there are doing a fantastic job in pulling a great deal of effort together to deliver what has been a huge success, and a massive shout out to all of the voluntary organisations, things like Community Action, IsleVote21 and people like that who've done a fantastic job. You know, my point is much the same in a lot of ways as Nick's, but I think it comes down to a communication thing from the council, and offering you know, expertise and infrastructure from the remainder of things like the library sector into people who are volunteering and maybe new to it. I mean, I worked as a school librarian for a while, and I know that it's not just a question of sitting and drinking coffee and handing out some books. There's quite a lot of expertise that you need in that environment, and that doesn't come naturally to people. If the council still has some staff who are professionals in that field, then offering that support to the voluntary sector, for example, can help. But I think that the main thing is not just throwing money at a situation, it's throwing money in the right places at the right time and communicating with the voluntary sector and asking them what they need.
Super, thank you very much, Doug. So the next is the first question will be for you, Doug. Again, it's a little bit of a long one, okay? And this one, and this one, I also received a question on this straight from Brighstone, okay? We have received many questions on housing. There is a need for homes on the island to address a shortage of housing that matches the local situation, especially for those looking to rent. But an environmental cost comes with every new house built in terms of losing green space and the required infrastructure and so on. How should the council, within the bounds of its powers, seek to create more homes for islanders whilst balancing the environmental costs of more building? Please,
Well,
Doug.
that's a biggie, isn't it?
It's a biggie, and many people asked.
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure, and I would, to be honest, if I was at the other end of this exercise, I would be asking exactly the same question. I am an islander, as I've said. I've was born here and grew up here, and I live in a pretty poor standard rented accommodation because I can't afford housing in the village where I grew up. So this is a topic which is really close to my heart. However, I am also completely understanding of people who are very concerned about overdevelopment and development of greenfield sites. I think we have to be really, really smart with how we do this. We have to choose brownfield sites that are legitimately brownfield sites, and there has to be a very tight definition of what that is, and they have to be absolutely prioritized as for use. I think the type of house that we build is far more important than the number of houses we build, and I am aware that there is an issue with a national target of houses, which is a big struggle for a county such as ourselves. But we do have the power to initiate certain changes within planning law. We have an island plan which we can develop, and we can do things like we can ensure that all houses should have a ground source heat pump or an air source heat pump or solar thermal. We should be moving away from fossil fuels being put into new builds, so we shouldn't have gas boilers going into places. We should be looking at absolute minimum requirements of insulation, and we should also be providing habitat in the builds permanently with things like pollinator habitat, bat boxes, swift boxes, owl boxes, that kind of stuff. There is a myriad of things that we can do, but the type of housing that we build is more important than the numbers.
Thank you, Doug. And over to you, Nick.
I've still lost on the question, but the entire question, but I'm quite happy with that because it comes down to very basically housing. What do we do about it? Again, I will go to our manifesto, and part of it is because I helped write it, and I don't need to look at it because it's very, very clear. The first thing is that we need housing that is suitable for local needs, and those local needs need to be established. And then the local needs also, the housing for local needs also needs to be subject to local priorities. So new housing has to be for local people. Not to say that we don't want people on the island coming from wherever. That's not a problem. It is very much, how do you actually prioritize the people who live on the island? Then you've got to have social housing, and these are all within the remit of the council. And you have to be focused on that possibility and make sure that the funds that are available from central government, from things like Solent Lep and the like, are actually targeted at the things that we actually need. So the infrastructure that we need. And yes, the green imperative is, how do we do less damage to the environment? It's something I put up in a tweet or a Facebook post earlier on today, because it is, how do we actually do much less damage? Passive house development, which basically means houses which do not need a lot of energy going in. Low resource use, so wooden frame housing, and more biodiversity. So as Doug made the point, there are little things that you can do to actually make things, make housing less damaging to the environment, and in some ways even improve biodiversity. Because let's be honest, some fields, very large fields, can be very, very biodiverse deserts. So it comes down to those types of plans that will actually help the islanders, but also not damage the environment in the same way that very large executive houses in the middle of absolutely nowhere can create. So it's planning laws. And coming back to the council, how about having a few more planning enforcement officers? Very simple, good start.
Thank you, Nick. So 2 more questions. Over to you, Nick. What will you do to address all the empty shops in each town? The main streets are dying. What should the council do to specifically address this issue?
Sorry, I don't like leaving blank spaces in words. I talk too much anyway, so I'm not very good at silence. If you drive down Newport High Street, you have seen over the last few years, and accelerated recently, a loss of very large shops, retail shops. If you go down the back streets, you see a plethora, a very large number of very successful small independents. And those independents have always struggled, and now they've suddenly come into their own because they are the people who are fast on their feet. They're innovative, they open when they can, they try and reach out to their local customers. So the first thing is actually look to the islanders who exist with ideas to actually produce the retailing and the cafes and the things that will actually regenerate a town centre. Second thing is repurposing of those. Sorry, no idea who that was. Obviously a Green Party member trying to put me off my stride.
Okay, I'll give you an extra 10 seconds. It's okay.
It's fine. It does come down to recognition that there is an issue, and what can the council actually do about it? So the first thing is that one of the many things that you can do is actually repurpose those shops, look to move arts, various other sort of cooperative opportunities where you could move training organizations into those sort of buildings. You could actually repurpose the high street so that it attracts more people in. And there is no doubt that there are lots of examples around the UK of that happening. One example is where they actually got rid of old housing, old shops, and they actually put a park in the middle of the area, so you can actually make it attractive to go there. Thanks for the time, the extra time.
No problem at all. All right, thank you very much, Nick. Okay, over to you, Doug. High Street regeneration.
Yeah, this is a sort of greatest hits of Isle of Wight issues, the questions that are coming out this evening, isn't it? You spend any time in pretty much any town on the island, and there are a number of empty units. Some towns are suffering more than others in that respect. The Green Party as a whole has got some really forward-thinking ideas about that. So things like startup grants for small independent traders who can then take on a high street premises. We're looking to fight for business rate relief for the first 24 months of those businesses trading in their premises. But the real thing comes back to kind of localism, really, and local business providing services that local people are going to use. And the job of the council should be to open up the opportunity for those local business people to take on the premises that are vacant. You can try and fund people to go into things, but at the end of the day, what you have to do is you have to try and sort of seed sustainability into it. And sort of people breed people in that respect. So once you get a few businesses that become sustainable, then that becomes a cluster, and then you begin to see a kind of self-sustaining recovery within those high streets. And again, I look to what's happened in Ventnor as an example, and I think there are far fewer empty units in Ventnor than there were 10 years ago. And from the top of my head, and there certainly seem to be fewer empty units in Ventnor than there are in places like Sandown. So it's about giving people the opportunity to go in, use those units for businesses that local people want to use.
Okay, thanks ever so much, Doug. The very last question, a nice open one for you. Knowing your local community as you do, what local issue would you like to address that you know is of concern to residents?
Is that coming to me first?
That's for you, Doug. Yeah.
Jolly good. Well, I'm gonna jump into the breach on this one, and I'm going to say motorcycle racing on public roads. I know this is a hugely emotive issue. I know there are really strong feelings both for it and against it. And I have to say that in the current forms of the races that have been proposed, I think that they are the wrong events in the wrong locations. Now, I'm not against motorsport. I'm not against motorbike racing. To coin a kind of corny phrase, some of my best friends are motorcyclists. Now, the point here is that what we should be doing as an island is we should be encouraging sustainable, innovative, forward-thinking events which are going to benefit the community going forward for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And I'm afraid that a dangerous, noisy, pollutive event through AOMB, triple SI, rewilding schemes, past people's houses, using petrochemical technology, which frankly has had its day, is not what we should be encouraging. There are already electric bike events all over the country. I was in fact contacted by somebody who works at them the other day, asking if I would be interested in going to one and seeing it as an alternative. Now, I think that we have the imagination and the potential here to have an event of that nature, which is really great, but there need to be significant far-reaching changes on both the routes that have been chosen and on the technology that's been used. I have, as I mentioned earlier on, I've got a background in events management, and I know that the impact of an event village of that size will have, and it's really worrying, but we can do it better, and we should do it better than what's on the table now.
Thank you, Doug. Over to you, Nick. Just let me know if you'd like the question again.
Oh, I don't think so, because the bottom line is this is exactly the issue that I was going to raise anyway. And I'm glad that the Green Party have actually recognised it, because I actually took the time, because of what I know, to actually reach out to the Isle of Man. I spoke to a very senior political figure there. They can't be named, but let's just say they were in full control of the TT racing. And their bottom line is, don't touch it with a barge pole. There are two aspects on the island which are really critical to this. The first is safety. TT races see an average of 2 people, competitors, dead a year, or connected to the racing dead a year, which is an awful, and 2 people dead means you've got a lot of injuries and life-changing injuries as well. The second thing is that they have 4 times as many, something like 8+ people who die a year because they are wannabe racers and they come round and they basically come off their bikes. And the one story that resonates with me is biker goes around the corner, a bit too fast, comes off, lays the bike down as you would expect. He skids, hits a brick wall, gets hurt. Bike hits the edge of the road, edge of the pavement, somersaults 200 foot and flattens a policeman. So that's the very first aspect that I really worried me. Now, the second aspect is actually directly council. Dave Stewart, council leader, turned around and said, we fully support this. It's a good thing. It's going ahead. Bouncing us all into something that nobody else knew about until he said, this is going to go ahead. Again, it comes back to the cabinet system. The cabinet supposedly agreed to it. That cabinet included both of the Conservative councillors that are now stepping down. They're all aspects of environmentalism, there's environmentalism, is these the right bikes and the like. Electric bikes, fine. I was actually personally involved in the support of a fuel cell bike up in Loughborough, talking to the company and working out ways in which they can improve it. So the technology is there, but can they deal with the safety thing? And the bottom line is, if you want to race, I'm afraid it has to be on a racing circuit. There's a lot of passions about this. And I, like Doug, know many people who happen to have motorbikes.
Thank you,
It's
Nick.
a perfectly valid, reasonable form of transport. But the bottom line is, not here, and certainly not these particular races, and certainly not with this council.
Thanks ever so much. As you're aware, you now have the opportunity for a 2-minute closing statement. If you have something prepared, that's absolutely fine, or you can just reflect on the process that we've been through this evening, and maybe there's a couple of points that you'd like to pick up on from this evening. So entirely up to you. Nick, you're first, please.
That's kind of you. I think it really comes down to the fact that obviously I've got a fair bit of knowledge about how the systems work, what the possibilities are, and how we can actually move things ahead. But for me, it comes down to representing the views and the interests of the entire ward. So all the way from the south coast, all the way up to the north coast. And I have been to both coasts and have pictures to prove it. Recent pictures. And really, it's a sort of, what are the key things that matter at the moment? And there are 2 aspects. One is local, which is things like TT races. And I think it's pretty clear where my views lie. And I will say, actually, if anybody has a recording of the parish meeting when I started talking about it, it's probably best if they delete it. I wasn't that polite. And the second thing is the sort of things like planning, which really impinge on people's lives. And how do we deal with the need for local housing, which is there, with the need to protect the environment, which we all actually live in and want to preserve in a way that can be actually done. And then the second thing is actually, what do you do at council level? And that's equally important, because you have to reach out to all of the council officers. And Doug is actually quite right. There are some very good officers in the council who can help the community and do, and actually steer them in the direction that they need. And at the moment, they're not being steered because the council has this cabinet inward facing limited approach, which does consultation after they've made a decision. And in fact, in the case of St Mary's Roundabout, after they'd already started the work. So it's a question of what do our ward public need, and I suspect that what we can offer is something which most of them will be quite happy to listen to.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick. So, Doug, your 2 minutes, please.
Well, there you go. You've heard what at least two of your candidates have to say this evening. I think it's a great shame that Stephen Hastings declined to attend. I think that we would all have a much healthier democracy if all of the candidates came and told the voters what they were about. But hopefully I've managed to convince you that I'm a credible, trustworthy candidate to Centre County Hall on May the 6th. And there's always things within a manifesto or a set of ideas with you which you will agree with, and some you'll agree with less. So it's up to you people watching this at home to choose who you think really has the best interests of the ward and the best interests of the island at heart. And if you're thinking, oh, well, change for change's sake isn't always the best route out of a problem, I completely agree. But genuine progress and genuine change for the better and for innovation, for future-proofing our environment and our economy is not for change's sake, it's for everyone's sake. And if you've had any thoughts that things could have been handled better over the last few years with planning, things like the huge redevelopment at Atherfield Bay Holiday Camp or Blanchard's in Brighstone, with competence, due diligence, things like the PFI contract, the floating bridge, with consideration for the future, things like continued investment in fossil fuel companies, £35 million of council investment going off island for no reason, not completely refusing to drill for oil and gas in the middle of our island. If any of those things seem wrong to you, then it is time for a change. And if you want to try and improve our environment for the present and for the future, for your kids and your grandkids, then it's time for a change. And the only new candidate here, and the only candidate with a fresh new set of ideas and a genuine lifelong attachment to this area is me. And that's why I'm asking you to vote for me on May the 6th.
Thank you very much, Doug. And thank you very much, Nick. It's been a real pleasure. It's been difficult for me not to jump in and put my views and opinions in as well. I obviously spend my life thinking about these issues myself, and I do have quite a lot of opinions on matters, but I think it's been really enjoyable for me, and it's lovely to meet you both. And that's it. This will be uploaded shortly. I wish you both success in the campaign, and from there onwards. Okay.
Yeah, great, good stuff. Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you, Nick. It's been good fun.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Doug.